Hello, everyone. Thank you for joining our previously recorded Solution Tech Talk on the Agent Client Collector, also known as the ServiceNow Monitoring Agent. We ask that you do not make purchasing decisions based off of the content presented in this webinar, and Safe Harbor does apply.
My name is Richard Brounstein. I'm a solution architect out of our ServiceNow New York office, and I've been with ServiceNow for 5 years, and I specialize in the IT operations management or ITX space, which includes all of our CMDB and discovery, service mapping, and event management technologies, as well as cloud management, cloud governance. And I'm going to today go into details on the Agent Client Collector, which is a new feature that is coming out in our Paris release. So I've only got a few slides. This is a technical presentation, and I am a technical person. And by the way, if you have questions, please use the Q&A. There will be many people viewing this, so whatever questions you ask, I'll make sure to repeat, because I'm sure lots of you will be interested in some good questions on the subject. What I'm going to go through is just a few slides overview on the Agent Client Collector, which is going to explain basically what it's about is monitoring. ServiceNow, for the first time ever in its history, is now monitoring customer applications. In the past, we only integrated with other monitoring solutions like Splunk or SCOM, and we would take in their event or metric data and then present it and use that data within our ServiceNow's event management. Now our Agent Client Collector is doing the monitoring directly. It's a complete out-of-the-box solution. And I will go into the technical details of how it works, the modules involved, these check definitions, which actually do the real horsepower work, the policies that you use to deploy it, the ones that are out of the box, where you can apply them, where you cannot apply them, the kinds of checks we can apply on operating systems and on applications. So we are now, in a nutshell, in the monitoring business where we can monitor Microsoft Windows servers or Linux servers with an agent. We're deploying an agent on these production servers, and we will be monitoring different aspects of the servers and receiving events when thresholds have been breached, and also collecting metrics on specific data that we are pulling, and then pulling this all into your ServiceNow instance. So it's very exciting for us. Now, I also want to state, while this agent that we're deploying is used right now in its first version is just for monitoring. This same agent in a future version later this year, you can expect, it will also be used for automated discovery, which will be very exciting for people struggling to find, to get credentials for their Microsoft Windows systems, because this agent runs as a non-administrator and will be able to use for full discovery on Windows. Okay, so this very busy slide shows a lot of different things. I'm going to go through them just one at a time. So what's our AI Ops solution with our Agent Client Collector all about? Now, third-party monitoring tools, if I could get your attention here on the left-hand side. These are many, many different monitoring tools that are on the market, and they work either as an agent or agentlessly, and they pull data about systems, and they send events when there's a threshold breached, and they send this right now. This is what we've been able to do for years in ServiceNow. They push these their events with REST API calls, or we have these connectors that run on the mid servers. This little green circle in the middle is our mid server, and it would run a connector which would go into these tools and pull the data and pull it in, and then we normalize the data. So our AIOps solution is all about normalizing events and metric data coming from many, many different monitoring tools, all making our ServiceNow event management a single pane of glass. What we are adding to this is down here in the lower left, the Agent Client Collector. And so this is now an agent that runs on Linux or Windows. You can see the nice little penguin and Windows logo icons right here. And what happens now is this communicates to a mid server. So the mid server doesn't have to go out and communicate to it. It communicates to the mid server. It gets information about what policies, in other words, what do we need to monitor? And it takes the monitoring data, it will send events to the mid server, which then gets sent to AIOps, or it'll even send just regular metric data to the mid server, which then gets pushed. The metric data, if you if anybody's familiar with it, is using something we have called our operational intelligence within ServiceNow, which is where we're constantly monitoring the metric information going on systems. Now, just another thing here on the bottom, I'm not going to go into detail on this, but you may have noticed this Now Loom. Sometime last year, ServiceNow acquired a company called Loom, which has a log file monitoring, and it's also doing some analytics on log files to determine where there are issues, even when you haven't set up thresholds. Okay, but we're focusing here on the ServiceNow agent client collector, going to the mid server, going into the ServiceNow instance. And so just, our objectives. We're trying to provide ways of ingesting events, metrics, and logs from multiple monitoring tools. So this is now ServiceNow is the only solution you can deploy for monitoring of applications and operating systems and do all the event management. You don't need to depend on a monitoring tool. It has the ability to ingest events and metrics. It also has the ability to do synthetic monitoring. So it can monitor an application from an end user point of view, a URL. And so that's very important, because then you can know if an application's up or down the same way a user knows if it's up or down. And so it does something called a proxy in order to do that. And so why ServiceNow? Aggregation of all events in one place. Okay. So now this focuses into some of the details on the agent client collector. So what happens is when you load the agent client collector, you need to, by the way, you need to be on your Paris version. So you'll upgrade eventually to Paris. And then you need to deploy the agent client collector application, which will give you all of these components then on your ServiceNow instance. It's available from the ServiceNow store, just so you know. There does need to be an upgrade for the latest version for Paris, and when Paris is released, you'll be able to get that. So I do want to stress that right now, if you're on your Paris instance, you will not be able to deploy the agent client collector, not for a few weeks when it'll be available from the store. But when you are, then what happens is it puts these plugins into your ServiceNow instance, and then you'll have the ability to deploy agents, which is a component that you download and install, and you'll have a mid server. Now the mid server becomes a listener. So the mid server has always been a workhorse to run discovery, run orchestration flows, etc. Now the mid server, and it's always had this listener capability, but now you'll use this listener capability when rolling out an agent. Well, basically able to operate as a listener for multiple agents. So the way it'll work is you'll designate one, maybe several mid-servers, a cluster of mid-servers actually, and you'll roll out any number of these agents on Windows or Linux machines, wherever. They can be very quickly rolled out. They all need to communicate to these mid-servers. And so the mid-servers are then constantly receiving data, and they're managing everything from the ServiceNow instance. So you'll be able to go into ServiceNow and say, I want to deploy a policy, and you'll say, I want to deploy a policy on every machine that meets a certain criteria. And it will then push out, go to the mid server, tell it to deploy the policy, goes out to every machine that manages that criteria if it's running an agent, and deploys those policies. And a policy is basically a set of checks. So it's the things to do. So there's, like, for example, a Windows policy that says, check the memory, check the CPU, check the network, check the disk space. And these policies are basically just scripts that I'll go into more detail on another slide. So the agent is just running these scripts. It runs the script on a regular basis. You decide how often. You decide the thresholds. It collects the results, and then if it exceeds a threshold, it sends an event to ServiceNow. And if it's set up for a metric policy, it's constantly sending its metrics, and you'll see the results. So now we're able to use this for monitoring, brings in events and metrics directly into ITOM Health. It will also, of course, if you've mapped your business applications, those metrics that will be bound to the CMDB will be able to be viewed through a service map. I will show that. And so, again, extended monitoring capabilities for ServiceNow. Okay, so just as I was saying before, we have checks, we have policies, and we have this thing called a check instance. So when you get the agent client collector installed, you'll see all these different check definitions that we have. An example is right here. It's this check cpu.rb. That's exactly what a file looks like. And it's going to take in a parameter that says the -w, which means what will happen if it's a warning, In other words, if the CPU is 80%, give me a warning, or -C, which is if the CPU is 90%, send me a critical event. And that's it. That's a check. So a check is one thing that's defined. A policy is a set of these checks that are defined for a particular reason. For example, Windows operating system checks, or Linux operating system checks, or Apache Tomcat checks, or end user HTTP checks. There can be any number of them, and a policy might contain one check or it contains several checks. And a policy is what gets rolled out. When a policy is rolled out, you'll have what's called a check instance. This is an instantiation of one of these check definitions that's running on a particular agent. So once a check is running on an agent, it's an instance, and you can modify the parameters for that particular check instance for that agent. So you could have different agents running different kinds of checks for different reasons. So Ryan here has a question regarding synthetic monitoring capabilities. Is there a way to configure synthetic monitoring for a service portal, catch a bad user experience, in other words, slow portal page load times? So the answer is yes. The monitoring agent allows you, for monitoring purposes, it will allow you to monitor the response time. Now, actually, I'll say yes and no. The HTTP synthetic monitoring agent is just a redirect. It basically just tells you if it's up or down. It doesn't have a threshold for if the user experience is 30 seconds or slower. That's something that I think they still need to add. What it does do, however, there is a metric check on the HTTP agent. I have it configured. I have a demonstration of that. And what that will show is that it's going to basically show what the numbers, the values that are coming in over time, and it will actually monitor through our operational intelligence and tell you if anything is exceeding what's considered normal behavior. It'll look for anomalies. So again, I'm going to show that in more detail, but great question, Ryan. Thank you. Okay, so check instance, as I said before, it's just an instantiation on an agent, and once you have an instance deployed, you can then set what parameters you want for that particular agent to use. Okay, there's out-of-the-box checks. Now, another thing to note here is this thing, Sensu. So if you've not heard of this term before, the check technology that we have is called Sensu, and Sensu is an open source plugin. It's an open source community of checks and monitoring, and that's what we're basically deploying. We're using this open source technology called Sensu, Nagios plugins, and here's a URL that you can copy now. List of different Sensu checks that you could add. We have several out of the box that we distribute, but you can always add additional checks. And there's also instructions how to add them, or even create your own. You can actually build your own checks that you want using the same Sensu technology. And then here is the workflow. So now I'm getting into the technical details. So you've got the agent client collector installed. How does it actually work? So when you get started and you've set up your agents, so now you've got these agents sitting out there, you'll be able to go and say, I want to publish a policy. So you have to activate a policy. You'll go into it. I'm going to show you this in a demo. What happens is you actually, to publish it, you edit this thing into a sandbox. You determine a filter, which will determine on which agents this policy will get published. And then you set any parameters that you want set on that policy, and it deploys. Then it gets saved and published. Once a policy is published and active, that's when it gets pushed out through the mid server. Well, it gets sent out to the agents, or it could get removed. You can deactivate it and the policy gets removed. So when you're working with this, you see these things as publish and republish buttons. And you have to know also that you'll see check instances, that when you deploy a policy, you'll see instances of the deployment as well as any parameter changes that you put in place. So this is the process. So policy is new. It's in the workflow. You have to make it active and publish it. It can be deactivated once it's active. You can set a filter to decide where it gets rolled out, where it doesn't get rolled out. And then you can even abort it with a revert all changes. So these are the simple buttons that you have. You could have thousands and thousands of agents rolled out, and then all you have to do is go into one policy and say, I want them rolled out on, for example, all Windows servers, or all servers that are running an Apache Tomcat or an IIS database or an Oracle database. I'm sorry, an IIS web server or an Oracle database. And then it meets the filter, and then it rolls them out automatically to every agent. But it follows this simple flow. Okay, that's it for slides. Let's demo this stuff. Okay, so I'm going to quit my, and I'm going to minimize this. So I'm now in my ServiceNow Paris instance. In fact, before I go into details on this, I have a machine here that it's a machine in which I've logged in through my RDS database. This machine is running my agent client collector instance. If I go into services, you'll see this is the service that gets run. So I'm not going through the details of installing it, but once it's installed, you'll see this service called Agent Client Collector. The service is running. One thing I do want to point out, actually I don't have to go into it, logged on as ./ServiceNow. So the Agent Client Collector is logged in not as the administrator or as the local system. It's logged in as a new user that will be created, usually called ServiceNow, a regular user. It does not have administrative rights, and that's something I very much love, and security people also love. When it's sitting there running, there are checks rolled out to it. I'm running the Beartail tool, which is a log file monitoring tool. It just lets you see what's in the log. And you can see right now on the system, it's got various checks and metrics that are running. They're set to run sometimes every 30 seconds, every minute. And I get a log entry here every time a check runs and what the status of this is. I find this very useful for debugging. I've actually got this in debug mode. So what I'm running, by the way, on this is full operating system checks. And if I turn off the follow the tail, I can actually see some of the message here. I'm also running some Tomcat metrics. It's running a check to match, let's see, Windows OS events. So it's running a check on Windows directory. And there's several, this is a Windows machine, so I'm running several Windows checks. I'm also running checks against a Tomcat Apache application. I'm running an application which runs on Apache Tomcat, and this is my application called Customer Service. Now I'm also monitoring this application as an end user through a proxy. And I'm going to show you the step-by-step on how I did all this. So once the checks are deployed, you actually don't need to be logged into your servers. I just wanted to show you this. You have once the agent is deployed. So the agents are deployed, and now I am logged into my ServiceNow Paris instance. I made sure to set my application to Agent Client Collector Monitoring. It's now an application. We've got several. It's actually a framework that you deploy, but it's Agent Client Collector Monitoring that you want to go in when you're actually doing anything on the Agent Client Collector. If I go into my navigator, I could type agent, and I could see under the Agent Client Collector all the things I need. So policies, check definitions, the different plugins, the agents. I can see my mid servers. My mid servers are configured to run operational intelligence, as well as to be receivers for the agents. And first thing I'm going to do is just show my agents. Put my screen down a bit so I can access this. Okay, so I've now got 5 different agents that have been deployed. You can see here that agents have the host names that are running on them, different IP addresses. You might have hundreds, even thousands of agents that could be deployed. They're communicating back through the mid server, and that's how I know everything that's going on. I want to take note of this one feature we have here called silent mode. Agents take up resources. And because they take up resources and they're running on servers, probably production servers, we have a silent mode, which means the agent's going to shut itself off. Within the agent configuration, it's configured to say if the CPU utilization gets up to a certain value, we're going to stop using resources and the agent will shut itself off. So it does not consume any resources or as few as possible on that server. And this silent mode will go to true. And so this happens automatically based on configuration. It's possible to turn the feature off, but you shouldn't do that. And this is for the protection of your applications. You definitely don't want agents to be going in. And you don't want agents to be running while your applications are struggling for resources for whatever reason. Now, if I go into one of my agents, I can see here that here's the latest alerts that have been sent, and one of them is actually open. It's a group alert on the agent monitoring status. By the way, you'll see the monitoring tool is going to be the ITOM agent. That's what you will see when we show these. But this checks lets me go and see here are the actual check instances that are running on my agent. So we can see we're doing a queue length check, checks the queue length, CPU system load, the system disk, system memory process. So these are all Windows checks, Windows policies. It's checking to see if a particular service, it's checking for the Tomcat service to see if it's running on Windows. If it stops running, it will send us an event. Now, some of these checks are events and some of them are metrics. So we actually differentiate between the two. Let's go in and take a look. So when I want to now make use of several of my policies, I go into my agent client collector, just like I was in there just a second ago. And I'm going to go into policies. And these are the different policies, which are collections of metrics or events that I could roll out. So if I go down here to, let's just say Windows OS events, I can click on this, Windows OS events policies. Now it's already set to active. You'd say I've already got it running. So the way you go about deploying a policy, first it takes a look at what this is doing. So you go into this and it says this policy runs Windows checks on Windows servers. It checks processor queue length, system CPU, disk, memory. So this runs several different checks. Lots of stuff going on here. Right now it's published. And I can see here, there's the filter that determines to which Windows servers it's going to publish. So a policy is associated with a configuration item type. So it's going to deploy on any CIs in the CMDB that are Windows Server, but that match this filter. I'm going to edit this in the sandbox. So now when I edit the sandbox, this allows me to modify the filter. So if I decided, now by default, it's going to be operational status is operational, but I might decide I only want it to run on other Windows servers that meet certain other criteria. I certainly don't want to change the CI type because that just wouldn't work. This is meant for Windows machines. I could also go down into the check instances and make some settings. So first I'm going to look at the filter to see where things get rolled out. Now I want to point out this thing called a proxy. I may have meant it before. This is not run as a proxy. A proxy is where you are monitoring something on a different machine with an agent on one machine. So the agents that this is going to get rolled out to might actually be monitoring a different machine. When we do our HTTP checks, when we're monitoring an application from an end user point of view, we need to run this under a proxy. And so that would be important. In fact, I will show you that HTTP check next time, and then we'll see how that is running on a proxy. So we've decided the filter. Now let's take a look at some of the checks. System disk, CPU load. So I'm going to go into these. They're active. These are the check instances. Now remember, a check instance is a check that's running on a particular agent. I can modify that check. In fact, I can modify a whole collection of checks in order to roll this out. This one currently happens to be active. So here's some of the things I can modify. The interval, how often does it run this check? What the check is going to do here is it's going to run this. This is just a batch file. It's a command that's going to be executed as often as this interval. And if it exceeds 60 seconds on response, it's going to time out. And that will send us an event. But it says right here what thresholds that will trigger a warning or a critical or any other things. Like this is a disk check. So mount points ignore mount points, ignore labels. And down here, we could see the check parameters. We could see that it's going to give us a warning if the CPU is exceeding 85%. But if the CPU exceeds 95%, it's going to get a critical. We haven't bothered to fill out any of those other parameters. And right here, I can actually run a check. I can actually say, test this check on the disk against a CI, and here's a configuration. So it's pulling CIs straight from the CMDB. So you must have a populated CMDB, as you must always with event management. If I click OK on this, oops. Now what's going is it's actually sending this check, this command, out to my agent, and it's going to tell it to run the check and determine if it runs. Now you would definitely do this if you customize some parameters, or certainly if you have a custom check altogether, and you would say, okay, we're going to test this check on this agent and on the chosen agent. By the way, what I was selecting was the agent on which it's going to run this check. So this could have been a proxy, but in this case, it's going to check the system disk on that agent. Let's come on. Let's hope it doesn't time out. If it takes more than 60 seconds, it's going to time out. You don't want to see that. Or my patience might time out. In fact, I hope I selected a valid. If I didn't select a valid agent, it would definitely time out and give me an error, in which case I'm just going to move on because I know my agents are all working anyway. Okay, I'm going to abort that. But anyway, so once you've got these checks deployed and once you've got these policies edited the way you want to, then you update or return to the policy, update if you made any changes. I'm going to actually update this to something like a 30-second interval. And then after you update the policy and any changes you make, you would do this button that says republish. This means you're then republishing whatever the check is you had, republish, publish. And so now we're deploying these Windows checks, this Windows policy for events out to all of my agents. And then, by the way, I could see here, this is the list of agents to which it's being deployed and the current status. So you can go into any policy and you'll always have a list of agents running that policy. You can go into any agent and you can see which policies are running which agents. Now I want to show just one more, and I'm going to show the HTTP entry point. So I'm going to actually focus this on HTTP. Now this is the end user monitoring. Again, we have events and we have metrics. So the events, this is a policy that's going to run entry points against a business service, and metrics, it's going to run a command against a business service, but it's going to collect response times and it's going to send that to us as a metric event for anomaly detection. Now, this is something I want to point out. When you go in and do an HTTP entry point for events or metrics, if I go into this and say I edit this in the sandbox, in order to do an HTTP endpoint, we need a mapped business application. So this is where we use ServiceNow's service mapping. Now, it doesn't have to be mapped through automated service mapping. It just means you have to have an application mapped. Now, I have an application out here. I switched over to my topology map. It's called Customer Service. Customer Service is a fully deployed application. If you're not familiar with ServiceNow service mapping, in a nutshell, basically, we determine servers and nodes and modules out there and network devices that are running some kind of component And based on the signature of that component, we've determined that that is part of this business service. So customer service is our business service, also called an application service, and it is mapped to these components. So when I go into my policy for monitoring this application, it says monitor applications of whatever name. The filter is going to determine which business services. So I don't give this a URL to monitor. I give this a business service. In this case, a business service, I said name contains customer. If I click on preview, there's only one business service that contains customer. And I can see here, it's customer service. What happens is the URL that it uses is the one from customer service from the entry point. So if I click here, it will monitor these entry points, these URLs. So it automatically goes into our customer service, business service, and the CMDB, pulls out whatever URLs are there, and that's what it sends to this policy. And so it's going to then run that URL in the case I've configured this for like 15 seconds, and then it gets a response, and it's going to send us that response time back to ServiceNow, and we'll be able to see that application from the end user point of view. So it's a fairly simple operation that it's using, but it's leveraging the fact that we have automated service mapping. So if you haven't mapped applications, you can't use this. But you don't have to use ServiceNow's automated service mapping. You can manually map business services. But if you are, then you can definitely make use of this. So this, I think, is one big advantage of using the ServiceNow agent client collector, because it's not just gathering raw data on the back end, it's also gathering end user data that you would expect from an application. Okay, so now we've got this data deployed and we've got all these checks deployed. How do we make use of this? So if I go into my application, so this is one of my this is one of the nodes of my business service. When I go to my topology mapping, in fact, the topology map I've got is made up of two Tomcat servers, one running on 172.31.1-214 and 172.31.10-52. So this is 172.31.1-214. So I'm already monitoring this now for metrics, and as a business application, I can go into this and let me go into my Tomcat, and just for the fun of it, let me shut this down. And in fact, because this application is deployed on two different machines that are load balanced, let me shut down the Apache Tomcat that's running on the second server. So Apache Tomcat's shut down. If I go into the user interface and refresh this, site can't be reached. I've just killed my application. So let's see what happens. And we've already seen some effect. I could see some of the events coming in here. Now, I'm going to go into the agent workspace, by the way, and I'm going to go into these lists of servers. So I'm going to go into my lists of open alerts. Now, one thing I want to note here, the source of the events is ITOM agent. So the ITOM agent is what represents the agent client collector. So when the agent runs its check, and you can see here where we've got check system memory, etc. And we've got it on some of these servers, 1-214, 10-52. I could actually go into some of these alerts. And because these configuration items happen to be mapped to a business application, when I go into an alert, like for example, this is a Tomcat alert, which happens to run on certain checks, we can see impacted services. I can see this is impacting my customer service application. It's a mapped application. But let's take a look at some of the details we get back at one of these events. So this is an event now that came in from the agent client collector. And We could see here the source, severity, group, task. Okay, so there's a message key, but here's the description. Windows service critical. The service Tomcat 9 is not running. Severity reduced. Now, there was a failover node. So this is something I've set up in my instance where it actually reduced the severity from critical to major because it noted that there were 2 nodes there. But still, we did get this from the agent client collector. And this is some other details that we have. The Tomcats event. This is the reporting mid-server, the ACC, and the Windows service check. Okay, so that's the details that we wanted. And we could see here also our customer service map. And let's note some other things. We've got processor queue length errors, warning the processor queue length is 380, but we could take a look at the totally severe ones, the severity critical. And this Windows service Tomcat 9 is not running, Tomcat 9 is not running. That is definitely of interest to me. And but we've also got this one, execution timed out, open alert on customer service from the ITOM agent. And that's just on the configuration item customer service. That represents our business service. So not only do we have all these Tomcat servers that are out, thanks that we know that from the agent client collector, we now know that the customer service application is actually down. And we know this because we've got this alert that says execution timed out. When I go to my topology map, we can see here the customer service is definitely in the red. And this is the event. This is the HTTP check follow redirect. So we have an ITOM agent that's running from a proxy that basically connects to this URL, and it determined that the application has a critical timeout. So regardless of what is going on with any of the other servers, we know we can't reach this application. Okay, so that's the advantage of having a URL end user monitor, as well as having monitoring different components, servers, Windows metrics, application metrics, etc. But now, in addition to this, we have rolled out metric collections. So what else are we getting from the agent client collector? So now let's talk about this Insights Explorer. So I can actually go into my application and say, let's view the metrics since it's being monitored, and let's take a look at some back-end metrics. So we could see this is data that the agent client collector is collecting from its monitoring. It's collecting network data, RAM usage percentage, CPU queue length. So I can actually see the details of the metrics. And I could see, these are my Tomcat machines. Again, the memory, we could see all this data. Now I can drag all this here into this Explorer, but it just so happens I have the Insights Explorer set up right here. And on the Insights Explorer, I have set up a view called Customer Service. And so I created a view called Customer Service to reflect my customer service application. And in my customer service application, I've been decided what metrics I care to monitor. Now I can go into all these details. And in fact, one of the other things that on the application service level that I can go into, well, is this internal Brounstein. So this is the total end user time. So I'm not just monitoring these backend metrics, which I can drag over here. In fact, I can go here and add some possibly troublesome metrics that we've seen over time, like this network device, and add this metric to the chart. And so I can make this thing very busy, and we can compare metrics over time. So I'm showing the last hour. I could show the last 3 hours. What I want to make note is this blue line right here. This represents the actual response time that we got when monitoring our URL. You could see right there the URL, HTTP internal Brounstein customer service. That is the actual URL, and the response time was here was 0.5 seconds, and we could see it over time. Up here, however, there seems to be a peak. Oops. Wait, that was the network time. And we could see here that, oh, it took up to, wow, 7 seconds. So there was a time at approximately 12:45, it took 7 seconds. And at that same time, when comparing something like the disk, the network device, let's take a look at the RAM usage percentage on one of our Tomcat servers. So it's showing in the green right now, but let's see the memory. And so at this time, when it was taking 7 seconds to get a response, the CPU usage was 59%. I don't know if that's good or bad, but now we can compare over time. You know, the disk usage available, the PV network device, and so it's just interesting to see what was going on. In fact, let's take a look at CPU load. So when we had that 7-second response time, the CPU load is this blue line, and oh my goodness, okay, that definitely says something. Because I think I see the CPU load as, oops, definitely looks like a very high point. It looks like CPU load was pretty high on this light blue line the whole time. And so that probably will definitely explain things, because we could see our CPUs definitely being overtaxed on this machine. But it's only giving us really bad performance time some of the time. Okay, so the thing to know about this is all this data is being generated through the ServiceNow Agent Client Collector. I got all this data available because I rolled out the client collector, and I configured those policy checks for monitoring the Windows data, as well as some other information such as Tomcat metrics, and as well as monitoring end user response time metrics. Now I'm going to go back to my application, and let's view the map again. And so application's still in a red state, execution timed out, and I still have these errors of critical process. And so this is where I think I want to go into some of my critical events where the Windows service is critical on certain machines. And I can open these alerts. And I think I'd like to do something about this. It just so happens that I have some remediation actions that I've got built on this. And one of them, since I know that this is a Apache Tomcat service that's gone down, one of my remediation is restarting my Apache Tomcat. And I can click on this Run Remediation. And what that will do is deploy a workflow job and hopefully restart my application service. So it operates and goes against the flow designer. While that's happening, let's see what this other question. Does View Metrics and Insight Explorer only show metrics from the ACC, or does it show metrics from other collected metrics, OI from SCOM? And I will type the answer and answer it live. No, View Metrics will show any metrics that are coming into the mid server that happens to be associated with that business service. So even if they're coming in from SCOM or SolarWinds or any custom metrics that you're sending in through the web service, so the View Metrics is not just the ACC. The advantage of the ACC is that it's much easier to configure those metrics. Now I want to also differentiate something. This Insights Explorer is a generic application, and I set up a view called customer service. I can go in, and I don't have to have a view, and I don't have to have monitoring metrics for nodes that are part of a business application. So I can go in and just add any configuration item I want to this. So we can go down here and say just add a configuration item. And if that configuration item has metrics on it, we can add it to the Windows Explorer. So it's so you can add anything, a Windows Server, Windows Service, Linux Server, anything you happen to want. Here's a list of all of my configuration items. So if any of these just happen to have, so if I were to add this one to my view, so I just added another CI. It doesn't have to be part of a business application or not. Now, when you're using the topology map and you're doing this view metrics, then you're only going to see configuration items that happen to be available and part of this business service. So I'm not going to see any configuration items otherwise. So I'll be able to go into here and say, hey, this is in the red, and I could drag here to show me this chart. And it brings up the metric explorer for this device that's in the red, and I could try to compare this to looks like CPU queue length or any of these other metrics that are going on and compare them side by side to say, hey, what's the reason that we're getting in the red? In fact, I can actually go into this and say, show me the boundaries for these anomaly scores. Go on. Okay, there we go. Show me the boundaries and show me the anomaly scores. And then what you get is the upper and lower bounds. So over time, we do analytics on all of these metrics. And with that data, we now have upper and lower bounds for what range we would expect the metric to fall into to be considered normal. Okay, I seem to have trouble bringing up my anomaly scores for that one metric. So I will move on. And it's completed. Okay, so good. So it restarted my Apache service. So I would expect the monitor to suddenly tell us that things are okay and the execution will not time out. And as long as I'm at it, I'm going to tell it to restart my second service. Do I still have a critical warning reopened? Okay, well, okay, things are switching back. This is moved to a warning state. And eventually I expect this thing to move back to a regular state. And And don't know if there's any more questions, but pretty much got just about everything that I would have that I can demo.
So if there's questions on anything that Richard shared today,
there was one other question that just came in. Going back to silent mode, does silent mode trigger its own event, or would it be a good idea to trigger its own event via business rule or something? Okay, so silent mode actually does in a way trigger event, because silent mode is triggered and it gets reflected back into the agent. The agent does communicate that it's in silent mode. And so from that, it's like its own silent mode type of an event. And so from that, you could automate based on agents going into silent mode. But it's not a normal ITOM. It doesn't necessarily send an event that say the ITOM agent is now in silent mode. But good question, Ryan. Yes, you definitely don't want everything going into silent mode and not know about it. And in fact, if I go look at my agents, let's see if any of them are in silent mode, which is always a good idea to verify. And nope, they're all not in silent mode. I'm sorry, but what were you saying, Patrick? I guess if there's no other questions, another question just popped in here. Again from Ryan. Is there a way to deploy ACC agents in mass to target hosts versus manually on each host? Yes, there is. It's a silent install, but you have to deploy it using whatever mechanism you would use to deploy configurations. So it's there's a silent installation, and you could run the agent install as a silent installation on all hosts. Now, the expectation might also be what I've seen done at other companies where they have agents, and they would have, for example, a Windows image or a Linux image that they deploy, which always has the agent on it. So, like it would be part of a standard build, would probably make a lot more sense. But certainly also deploying agents in mass as well. And I could see that, yeah, my business application is no longer in a critical state. So definitely the end user monitor kicked in. We still have assorted agent events here, processor queue length, Windows processor, execution timed out, Windows process where they're in a warning state. But we don't have a critical state for our customer service application, even though we do have occasional, what we call in the red, critical monitors here for some metrics.